Please don't let my son disappear. The words came out broken, barely louder than the rain striking the pavement. For a moment, everything around Grant Holloway seemed to stop. The cameras, the reporters, the bodyguards moving in practice formation, the steady rhythm of Manhattan traffic beyond the barricades. All of it faded beneath the sound of a stranger's trembling voice. A black woman stood in front of him, her fingers wrapped around his hand with the desperation of someone who had already run out of options. Water streamed from her dark coat. Her curls clung to her forehead. Her breathing was uneven, like she had been running for blocks. The security team reacted immediately, stepping forward to separate her from one of the most recognizable billionaires in America. But Grant didn't move. He didn't pull away. He simply stared, because something about her face reached into a place inside him he had spent years trying to protect. Something about her eyes felt impossible. Before we go any further, take a moment to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the people we wait a lifetime to find appear when we least expect it. Grant Holloway was not a man who believed in coincidence. At 52, he had built one of the largest technology companies in the country. Financial magazines called him brilliant. Investors called him visionary. Employees called him demanding. But beneath the tailored suits and billion-dollar headlines was a secret very few people knew. For nearly 12 years, Grant had been searching for someone. Not a business partner. Not a missing relative. A woman. A stranger he had never properly met. A woman whose face had faded with time but whose kindness had never left his memory. Every year he renewed the search. Every year the trail went cold. Every year he told himself it was foolish to keep hoping. Yet he never stopped. Across from him now stood a woman who looked nothing like the person he had imagined all those years. She looked exhausted, frightened, cornered by life itself. Her name was Amara Whitfield. 34 years old. 2 jobs. Endless bills. And a son lying 3 floors above them in St. Matthew Medical Center. 48 hours earlier, doctors had given her news no parent ever wants to hear. Her little boy needed a specialized procedure. Without it, his condition would continue to worsen. Insurance had denied coverage. Appeals had failed. Savings were gone. Friends had helped where they could. Churches had organized fundraisers. Neighbors had donated. None of it was enough. So when Amara heard that Grant Holloway would be visiting the hospital to announce a new pediatric foundation donation, she made a choice she never thought she would make. She waited outside in the rain. She waited through security checkpoints, crowds, and reporters. She waited because hope, no matter how small, was still hope. And when she finally saw him step from the black SUV, she acted before fear could stop her. "Please," she whispered again, her grip weakening as reality returned. "My son needs help." Grant's eyes dropped to her hand. Then they froze. There, barely visible beneath her sleeve, was a small scar running along her wrist. His heartbeat stumbled. A memory surfaced. A rainy night. Flashing lights. A frightened voice. A bracelet. Grant stared at the woman standing before him as the storm rolled across the city skyline. For the first time in 12 years, the search he had almost given up on was about to change everything. Amara released his hand the moment she realized how many eyes were watching her. The embarrassment arrived all at once, hot and sharp despite the cold rain soaking through her clothes. She stepped back instinctively, lowering her gaze. Around them, reporters whispered to one another. Camera lenses shifted. Security personnel exchanged uncertain looks. Nobody seemed to understand why Grant Holloway had not already walked away. Neither did Amara. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she tried to find the right words. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times while sitting beside her son's hospital bed. In every version she sounded composed, strong, dignified. Instead she felt exhausted. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I should not have done that." Grant continued looking at her, not with annoyance, not with pity, but with a strange concentration that unsettled her. The rain collected on the shoulders of his charcoal overcoat. He seemed completely unaware of it. Finally, one of his assistants stepped closer. "Mr. Holloway, the board members are waiting upstairs." Grant did not take his eyes off Amara. "How old is your son?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. 8. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. What is his name? Micah. She swallowed hard. His name is Micah Whitfield. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the city slowly returned. Car horns echoed from distant avenues. Rainwater trickled through storm drains. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed before fading into the distance. Grant glanced toward the hospital entrance. Come inside. Amara blinked. Sir, you are soaked. He turned toward the doors. Tell me what happened. The lobby of St. Matthew Medical Center glowed with warm amber light. Polished floors reflected crystal chandeliers overhead. Families sat in clusters beside windows overlooking the storm. Nurses moved through the corridors with quiet purpose. Amara felt painfully out of place walking beside one of the richest men in the country. Her sneakers left faint wet footprints behind her. She could feel curious stares following them. Grant led her to a private seating area near the pediatric wing. Once they sat down, he folded his hands and waited. The silence encouraged honesty. Amara found herself telling him everything. About Micah's diagnosis. About the endless paperwork. About insurance representatives who placed her on hold for hours. About working mornings at a grocery store and evenings cleaning office buildings downtown. She spoke about skipped meals, overdue bills, and sleepless nights spent watching monitors beside her son's bed. She did not cry. Somehow, that part of her had run dry weeks ago. Grant listened without interrupting. The more she spoke, the more details surfaced. The tiny apartment in Queens. The second-hand furniture. The way Micah still smiled despite everything. The way he pretended not to notice when she worried. When she finally finished, the space between them felt heavier than before. Grant stared toward the rain-streaked windows. 12 years. 12 years of searching. 12 years of private investigators, dead ends, and unanswered questions. Yet the woman sitting across from him clearly had no idea why he looked at her as though he were seeing a miracle. Then his gaze drifted downward again. To her wrist. To the small scar partly hidden beneath her sleeve. And suddenly another memory returned. Not the face. Not the voice. Something else. A faded bracelet decorated with tiny blue stars. His chest tightened. Because he knew exactly where that bracelet was. And for the first time in years, he was afraid to ask the question that had haunted him ever since that stormy night long ago. Grant leaned back slowly, but his mind was nowhere inside the hospital. It had drifted years into the past, to a night he rarely spoke about and never forgot. Outside the glass walls of the pediatric wing, rain continued to slide down the windows in silver streams, blurring the city lights into soft streaks of gold and white. Across from him, Amara sat quietly, unaware of the storm unfolding inside his thoughts. 12 years earlier, Grant Holloway had not been a billionaire. He had been a struggling entrepreneur trying to keep a failing company alive. Investors had abandoned him. Debt had followed him everywhere. Every door seemed to close before he could reach it. Then came the night that changed everything. He had been driving through Brooklyn after a meeting that ended in disappointment. Rain hammered the streets. Visibility was poor. His car had broken down near an industrial district long after most businesses had closed. His phone battery had died. The roads were nearly empty. For the first time in his adult life, Grant had felt completely alone. He remembered standing beside the disabled vehicle under the freezing rain. He remembered feeling dizzy from exhaustion after days without proper sleep. Most of all, he remembered a young woman appearing out of nowhere. She could not have been much older than 20. She wore a worn denim jacket and carried a small backpack over one shoulder. She stopped when everyone else kept walking. She asked if he was all right. He barely remembered what he said. He only remembered her refusing to leave. She stayed. She found help. She made sure he was safe before disappearing back into the darkness without even telling him her full name. By the time he tried to find her again, she was gone. Completely gone. Yet one detail remained. As she reached for something inside her backpack that night, a bracelet had slipped from her wrist. Blue stars. Tiny silver beads. Childlike and simple. Grant had picked it up after she left. For years he kept it locked inside a small wooden box in his office. Every investigator he hired received the same impossible assignment. Find the woman who wore this bracelet. Nobody succeeded. The trail always vanished. Sometimes they found similar jewelry. Sometimes they found women who matched parts of the description. None of them were her. The search became a private obsession. Not because he believed he owed her money or gratitude. It was because she had stopped for a stranger when she had no reason to. During the worst night of his life, she had treated him like he mattered. Success came later. Wealth came later. Awards, interviews, magazine covers, private jets, all of it came later. But that single act of kindness remained untouched by time. Back in the present, Grant looked at Amara again. She was staring through the glass toward the elevators leading to the children's floor. Every few seconds she glanced at the clock mounted above the reception desk. Every movement revealed where her heart truly was. Not here. Not with him. Upstairs with her son. The realization struck him harder than he expected. She had not approached him because he was famous. She had not asked for an autograph, a photograph, or attention. She was simply a mother running out of time. Then something caught his eye. As Amara adjusted her sleeve, a thin silver chain slipped from beneath her collar. Hanging from it was a tiny charm. Grant's breath stopped. It was a blue star. Smaller than he remembered. Older. Worn by years of use. But unmistakable. His pulse quickened. The room suddenly felt smaller. The rain outside seemed to disappear. For 12 years he had searched for answers. Now one was sitting only a few feet away. And yet he still could not be certain. Because if he asked the wrong question and she looked at him with confusion, the hope he had carried all these years would vanish in an instant. Grant could feel the question pressing against his chest, demanding to be asked. His eyes remained fixed on the small blue star hanging from Amara's necklace. It rested just above her heart, worn smooth by years of use. The edges were slightly faded. The silver no longer reflected the light the way new metal would. But it was enough. More than enough. He had spent over a decade chasing fragments of memory. A bracelet. A rainy night. A stranger who disappeared before he could properly thank her. Now, for the first time, those fragments seemed to be forming a picture. Across from him, Amara remained unaware. Her attention was locked on the elevator doors at the end of the corridor. Every time they opened, her shoulders straightened slightly. Every time they closed again, disappointment settled back into her expression. A nurse passed by carrying a tablet. Two parents sat nearby speaking quietly beside a vending machine. The hospital continued moving forward while Grant sat frozen between the past and the present. Finally he spoke. That necklace. Amara looked down instinctively. Her fingers touched the chain. This? She asked. Yes. She smiled faintly for the first time since entering the hospital. It was a tired smile but genuine. I have had it forever. Grant felt his pulse quicken. Where did you get it? Her expression softened further. My mother gave it to me when I was a little girl. She glanced down at the charm again. The bracelet broke years ago. This was the only piece I could save. The words landed like a spark in dry grass. Grant remained perfectly still. Amara continued without noticing the effect. I almost lost it a dozen times. She laughed quietly. I probably should have put it somewhere safe, but I never could. For a moment, she seemed transported by the memory. My mother used to tell me that as long as I kept it, I would always find my way through difficult times. Grant lowered his eyes. Difficult times. He thought about the countless meetings, flights, interviews, and business deals that had filled the years since that stormy night. Through all of it, a small bracelet had remained locked away in a private safe. He had never fully understood why he could not let it go. Now he did. Before he could respond, another voice interrupted. Mr. Holloway? One of the hospital administrators approached with cautious professionalism. The woman carried a folder against her chest and offered a polite smile. We are ready whenever you are. Grant looked at her, then at Amara, then back toward the elevators. I will need a few minutes. The administrator nodded and stepped away. The moment passed, but the tension remained. Amara shifted uneasily in her seat. I am sorry if I have taken too much of your time. You have not. His answer came immediately. Too quickly. Amara blinked. Grant leaned forward slightly. Which floor is your son on? Pediatric cardiology. 7th floor. He nodded once. May I meet him? The question surprised her. She stared at him as if she had misheard. You want to meet Micah? If that is all right with you. Amara hesitated. People with power often offered sympathy. They offered polite words. Sometimes they offered donations. They rarely offered time. Yet something in Grant's expression felt sincere. There was no performance in it. No public relations team. No cameras. Just quiet determination. After several seconds she nodded. He would like that. They stood together and began walking toward the elevators. The polished floor reflected the overhead lights beneath their feet. Around them, conversations blended into a low murmur. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. As the elevator doors opened, Grant slipped one hand into his coat pocket. His fingers brushed against his phone. Inside that phone was a photograph he had carried for years. A photograph of the bracelet found after the most important encounter of his life. And as the elevator carried them toward the 7th floor, he made a decision. Before this day ended, he was going to find out whether fate had finally answered a question that had haunted him for 12 long years. The 7th floor felt quieter than the rest of the hospital. The lights were softer. The voices lower. Even the footsteps seemed gentler along the polished hallways. As the elevator doors opened, Amara immediately looked toward room 714. Her pace quickened without her realizing it. Grant followed beside her, hands in his coat pockets, observing everything. Family photographs decorated the walls. Children's drawings hung near the nurse's station. A volunteer pushed a cart filled with books and stuffed animals past them with a warm smile. For a moment, the floor felt less like a hospital and more like a place built to protect hope. Amara stopped outside the room and glanced through the small glass panel in the door. Relief washed across her face. Micah was awake. The 8-year-old boy sat propped against his pillow, reading a worn comic book beneath the glow of a bedside lamp. The heart monitor beside him blinked steadily. Grant noticed how quickly Amara's entire expression changed. The worry remained, but something brighter appeared beneath it. Love. The kind that survives sleepless nights and impossible circumstances. She opened the door quietly. Hey baby. Micah looked up instantly. His face lit up. Mom. She crossed the room and kissed his forehead. How are you feeling? Better. He lowered the comic book. Then he noticed Grant standing near the doorway. Curiosity filled his eyes. Who is that? Amara hesitated. She was not entirely sure how to answer. This is Mr. Holloway. Micah's eyebrows rose. Even children recognized the name. The Grant Holloway? Grant smiled faintly. I am afraid so. Micah laughed. The sound filled the room with unexpected warmth. You are taller than you look on television. Grant actually chuckled. It had been a long time since anyone spoke to him without caution or expectation. I get that a lot. The conversation flowed naturally after that. Micah spoke about baseball, about superheroes, about the science projects he wanted to build when he returned to school. Grant listened carefully. The boy was bright, funny, brave in ways that should never be required of a child. Yet beneath every smile was a reality impossible to ignore. The room contained reminders everywhere. Medication schedules pinned to the wall. Medical charts. Equipment quietly humming in the background. Time was running short. A knock interrupted the moment. A doctor entered carrying a tablet. His expression immediately changed when he recognized Grant. Mr. Holloway. The greeting carried surprise. Then his attention shifted toward Amara. Professional sympathy settled across his features. Mrs. Whitfield, I was hoping to speak with you. The atmosphere changed instantly. Amara stood. Her fingers tightened around the bed rail. She already knew that look. Parents in hospitals learn to recognize it quickly. The doctor guided her into the hallway. Grant remained inside with Micah but could see them through the glass window. The conversation was brief. Too brief. When it ended, Amara lowered her head. Her shoulders sank. The doctor placed a reassuring hand over his tablet and walked away. She remained standing alone in the corridor. Motionless. Grant excused himself from Micah and stepped outside. What happened? Amara blinked rapidly before answering. The surgical team needs a final financial authorization by tomorrow afternoon. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. If they do not receive it, everything gets pushed back. Grant studied her expression. How much? She looked away. Embarrassment returned immediately. It does not matter. Amara. She closed her eyes briefly. $280,000. The number hung in the air between them. For Amara it felt impossible. For Grant it was less than the cost of a single business dinner. Yet before he could say anything, two hospital visitors walking down the hallway slowed their pace. One recognized him immediately. Another recognized Amara from the crowd outside earlier. Quiet whispers followed. Curious looks. Assumptions. Judgments. Amara felt every one of them. A struggling mother standing beside a billionaire. To strangers, the story seemed obvious. To Grant, it felt painfully unfair. Because none of them knew the truth. And as he watched her endure those stares with quiet dignity, he became more determined than ever to uncover what connected them before fate pulled them apart again. Amara excused herself a few minutes later and stepped into a quiet family waiting area at the end of the corridor. The room overlooked the city through floor-to-ceiling windows streaked with rain. Evening had begun settling over Manhattan. The skyline glowed beneath heavy clouds, and thousands of lights flickered to life across the distance like stars emerging one by one. She lowered herself into a chair near the glass and wrapped her arms around herself. For the first time all day, nobody was asking questions. Nobody needed answers. The silence felt strangely comforting. Down the hall, nurses moved between rooms. Elevator doors opened and closed with soft chimes. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. The sound lasted only a moment before fading away. Amara watched droplets slide down the window and disappear into one another. It reminded her of the years that had passed. One difficult season blending into the next. One challenge following another until she could no longer remember what life felt like before survival became her full-time job. Her fingers drifted toward the necklace around her neck. The small blue star rested against her palm. She smiled faintly. Mom would have liked Micah, she whispered to herself. Her mother had always believed people carried light inside them. Even during hard times. Even when the world seemed determined to prove otherwise. That belief had annoyed Amara as a teenager. Now she clung to it. Because without it, there would be nothing left to hold on to. Across the hospital, Grant stood alone inside a private conference room reserved for visiting donors. The city lights reflected against the polished surface of a long mahogany table. His assistant waited near the door while he stared at an object resting in his hand. The bracelet. 12 years had faded the colors. The elastic thread had long since broken. Yet the tiny blue stars remained intact. He turned one of them gently between his fingers. Every investigator. Every search report. Every unanswered lead. It all seemed impossible now. The woman he had spent years searching for was sitting only a few floors away. Yet uncertainty remained. Hope could be dangerous. Hope could make people see connections that did not exist. His assistant cleared her throat carefully. You have postponed 3 meetings today. Grant nodded without looking up. I know. Should I reschedule tomorrow's flight? Finally, he raised his eyes. Yes. The answer surprised even him. The assistant hesitated. May I ask why? Grant looked back at the bracelet. Because some things are more important than business. The room fell quiet again. Meanwhile, Amara remained beside the window. Her phone vibrated softly. A text message from her landlord. Another reminder about overdue rent. She closed the message without replying. Minutes later, another notification appeared. Then another. Bills. Deadlines. Problems waiting for solutions she did not have. She placed the phone face down on the table and closed her eyes. The exhaustion settled over her like a heavy blanket. Not physical exhaustion. Something deeper. The kind carried by people who have been strong for too long. A warm voice interrupted her thoughts. Mind if I sit here? She opened her eyes. Grant stood nearby holding 2 paper cups. Steam rose from the lids. He offered one to her. Hot chocolate, he said. The cafeteria was out of coffee. Amara accepted it with a small smile. Thank you. They sat side by side facing the rain-covered skyline. Neither spoke for several moments. The silence felt surprisingly natural. Finally, Grant reached into his coat pocket. His fingers closed around the bracelet. The object seemed heavier than it should have. He stared through the glass toward the city lights. Then he made up his mind. Slowly, he placed the bracelet onto the table between them. Amara looked down. The moment her eyes landed on the tiny blue stars, the color drained from her face. The paper cup nearly slipped from her hand. And for the first time since they met, Grant knew he was no longer chasing a memory. He was sitting beside it. Amara stared at the bracelet as though she had seen a ghost. The tiny blue stars rested on the table between them, illuminated by the soft glow of the waiting room lights. For several seconds she could not speak. Her eyes moved from the bracelet to Grant and back again. Her breathing slowed. The city beyond the glass seemed to disappear. The rain, the lights, the distant sounds of the hospital. Everything faded beneath the weight of a memory she had not visited in years. "Where did you get this?" she finally whispered. Grant did not answer immediately. He had imagined this moment countless times. In some versions, the woman did not recognize the bracelet. In others, she denied ever owning it. But he had never imagined the expression now staring back at him. Recognition. Complete and undeniable. He exhaled slowly. "You left it behind 12 years ago." Amara blinked. "That is impossible." "I thought so too." He leaned back in his chair. "Until I saw the star around your neck." Her hand instinctively rose to the necklace. The small charm trembled slightly between her fingers. Then the memories came rushing back. A rainy night in Brooklyn. A disabled car near an empty street. A young man standing alone beside it. She remembered his exhausted face. The frustration in his eyes. The way he tried to pretend everything was fine when it clearly was not. At the time she had been working late shifts while attending community college classes during the day. She had barely enough money for herself. Yet something about the stranger had made her stop. "The car," she said quietly. Grant nodded. "The rain." She nodded again. "You were freezing." A faint smile appeared on his face. "And you were stubborn." For the first time all evening, Amara laughed. The sound was small but genuine. "You told me to leave at least 3 times." "I remember." Their eyes met. Neither spoke for several moments. The years separating that night from this one seemed to shrink. Finally, Grant reached into his pocket and removed his phone. After a few seconds, he opened an old photograph. The image showed the bracelet exactly as it had looked when he found it. New, bright, unbroken. He handed her the phone. Amara stared at the screen. Her eyes widened. "You kept this?" "Every year." Her gaze lifted slowly. "Why?" The question carried no suspicion, only disbelief. Grant looked toward the rain-streaked window before answering. "Because that night changed my life." His voice remained calm, but something deeper moved beneath the words. "I was at the lowest point I had ever experienced. Everyone around me saw failure. Most people walked past without noticing me." He paused. "You did not." Amara lowered her eyes. "I only helped." "Exactly." His answer came immediately. "You had no reason to stop. No reason to care. Yet you did." The bracelet remained between them. A small object carrying 12 years of unanswered questions. Grant folded his hands together. "I hired investigators." Amara stared at him. "What?" "For years." She shook her head in disbelief. "You searched for me?" "I never found you." His smile softened. "Until today." The reality settled slowly over her. While she struggled to raise a son, while she worked double shifts, while life pushed her from one challenge to another, somewhere in the city someone had been looking for her. Not because she owed him anything. Not because he expected something in return. Simply because he never forgot. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she quickly looked away. Then Grant said the words that changed everything. "Tomorrow morning, Micah's procedure will be approved." Amara froze. "What?" "The hospital will receive whatever authorization they need." She opened her mouth but no words came. "Grant, I cannot ask you to do that." "You are not asking." His voice was gentle. "You already helped me long ago." He glanced at the bracelet one last time. "I have been waiting 12 years to say thank you." And as tears finally slipped down Amara's cheeks, she realized that the impossible encounter outside the hospital had never been an accident at all. It had been a reunion that fate had quietly arranged long before either of them understood why. Amara sat perfectly still as the reality settled around her. The bracelet remained between them like a bridge connecting two lives that had traveled separate roads for more than a decade. Beyond the windows, the rain had finally begun to ease. The glass no longer trembled beneath heavy drops. Instead, small streams slid quietly toward the city below, reflecting thousands of lights across the darkening skyline. For the first time in months, Amara felt something she had almost forgotten. Relief. Not complete relief. Not yet. But enough to allow her lungs to fill without the familiar weight pressing against her chest. She looked at Grant and shook her head slowly. I do not know how to thank you. Grant smiled gently. That makes two of us. The answer caught her by surprise. He leaned back and folded his hands. For years I imagined what I would say if I ever found you. His eyes drifted toward the bracelet. I thought I would have the perfect speech prepared. A quiet laugh escaped him. Turns out I do not. Amara smiled through tears. The simplicity of the moment felt more powerful than any grand gesture. There were no reporters, no cameras, no audience. Just two people sitting together while fate quietly completed a circle neither had understood. The next morning arrived with pale sunlight spilling through the hospital windows. The storm had passed. The city looked freshly washed beneath a bright blue sky. Nurses moved through the pediatric wing with renewed energy. Families gathered around breakfast trays. Somewhere down the hall, a child celebrated being discharged. The sounds of hope seemed stronger than the sounds of worry. Amara stood beside Micah's bed helping him finish a cup of orange juice. He looked more excited than nervous. Mom, he said, do you think Mr. Holloway is coming back? She smiled. I think so. Almost as if summoned by the question, a familiar knock sounded at the door. Grant stepped inside carrying a small gift bag. Micah's face lit up immediately. You came. I said I would. Grant handed him the bag. Inside was a model space shuttle kit. Micah stared at it with amazement. No way. I heard you like science. Micah looked as though Christmas had arrived early. While the boy examined every detail of the model, Grant stepped quietly toward the window. A few moments later the lead surgeon entered the room carrying a folder. This time his expression was completely different from the day before. Calm, confident, encouraging. He reviewed the schedule for the procedure and explained the next steps. Everything was approved. Everything was ready. When he left, Amara remained silent for several seconds. She knew exactly what had made the difference. Yet Grant simply stood near the window watching sunlight spill across the city. He never mentioned money, never mentioned influence, never mentioned what he had done. That silence told her more about his character than any speech could have. Later that afternoon, while Micah rested, Amara found Grant sitting alone in the family lounge. The bracelet rested in his hand once again. She sat beside him. You know, she said softly, my mother used to tell me that kindness never disappears. Grant glanced toward her. What do you mean? She smiled at the bracelet. She said it travels through the world until it finds its way home. For a moment neither spoke. The sunlight filled the room with warm gold reflections. Dust drifted lazily through the beams of light. Somewhere nearby, a volunteer played piano in the lobby below. The music floated upward through the quiet hospital corridors. Grant looked down at the bracelet and finally understood something that had taken 12 years to learn. Success had changed his life. Wealth had changed his circumstances. But a single act of kindness had changed his heart. And now, sitting beside the woman who had unknowingly given him that gift so many years ago, he realized there was no debt to repay. There was only gratitude. And gratitude, unlike money, could never truly be measured. 1 year later, spring sunlight poured across Central Park like liquid gold. The trees swayed gently beneath a bright blue sky, their leaves shimmering in the afternoon breeze. Children laughed somewhere near the playground. Dogs chased tennis balls across open grass. The city still moved with its usual urgency beyond the park's edges, but here, for a little while, everything felt slower, calmer, peaceful. Amara sat on a wooden bench beneath a maple tree, a paperback book resting unopened in her lap. She was not reading. Her attention remained fixed on a boy racing across a nearby field with endless energy. Micah. Healthy. smiling, running so fast that it seemed impossible to remember the hospital room where he had once spent his days. His sneakers kicked up small clouds of dust as he chased a bright red kite dancing against the sky. Every few moments he looked back toward his mother and waved. Each time Amara waved back. The simple exchange never failed to make her smile. Some miracles arrived with fanfare. Others arrived quietly, disguised as ordinary afternoons. Footsteps approached along the path. Amara looked up and saw Grant carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her before taking a seat beside her on the bench. Neither spoke immediately. They simply watched Micah run. The sunlight filtered through the branches overhead, casting moving patterns across the grass. A gentle wind carried the scent of fresh flowers from a nearby garden. It was the kind of day people often forgot while living it, only to remember years later with surprising clarity. "He is getting faster," Grant said. Amara laughed softly. "He reminds me every day." They watched as Micah attempted to launch the kite higher into the air. It dipped once, then caught the wind and climbed. The boy raised both arms in triumph. Grant smiled. There had been many changes over the past year. Amara no longer worked double shifts. A scholarship foundation established in her mother's name now helped struggling families facing medical emergencies. Micah had returned to school. Grant continued running his company. The headlines still followed him. The interviews never stopped. Yet somehow, the things that mattered most no longer felt connected to boardrooms or stock prices. They felt connected to moments like this. Quiet moments. Human moments. Amara reached into her purse and removed something wrapped carefully in a soft cloth. She handed it to Grant. Curious, he unfolded the fabric. Inside rested the bracelet. The blue stars caught the sunlight. Restored. Repaired. Beautiful again. Grant stared at it. "You fixed it." Amara nodded. "It belongs to both of us now." For a moment neither moved. The bracelet sat between them exactly as it had on the hospital table months earlier. Only now it carried a different meaning. Not a reminder of what had been lost. A reminder of what had been found. Nearby, Micah came running toward them, slightly out of breath and grinning from ear to ear. "Did you see that?" he asked. "The kite almost touched a cloud." "Almost," Grant replied. "I think it did." Micah laughed and ran off again before either adult could answer. The 3 of them remained surrounded by sunlight, laughter, and the steady rhythm of an ordinary afternoon. No dramatic speeches followed. No grand declarations. None were necessary. The city continued humming in the distance. The leaves continued dancing overhead. The kite continued soaring against the endless blue sky. And as Grant looked at the bracelet resting in his hand while Amara watched her son run free, both understood something words could never fully explain. 12 years earlier, a small act of kindness had begun a journey neither of them could have imagined. Now that journey had come home. The wind moved softly through the trees. The sunlight warmed their faces. And in the quiet that followed, justice, gratitude, and hope settled gently into place, leaving behind nothing but peace.